Considering all the amazing productions that you have worked on, when you receive a mix in the studio, do you immediately recognize a hit? Does it come to you and you go, this is going to be a hit, I can feel it? Does that, is it perhaps a surprise when that goes on to be the voice of a generation, effectively?
That is an interesting question. You know, there have been one or two that you can kind of tell, but it's got to do with the people that are involved. You know, you get a sense of the buzz of a project before it gets to you. You're very plugged in that city and regular clientele, so you know what people are up to, and you're visiting them at the studio, and you're expecting things to come. And if they're working on something heavy, they'll come in once or twice or a few times as they're working on it, just to make sure they're on the right track, you know.
And that actually sort of leads on to the next question, actually, which is, how closely do you work with the producers and mixing engineers? And this person has also asked, how often are changes requested from your side to perhaps, could you adjust something in a mix, or is something not maybe working to your taste?
It depends. We work very closely with some, and there's some producers who will go to various facilities, and you'll see them once in a while, and there's some that are just fixed and loyal. There's this one guy, T-Bone Burnett. I've been working with him for 20 years, and I've done every single project he's done for that amount of time. He's just locked in because we've figured out our thing, you know. And sometimes when somebody like that is looking for somebody, it'll take a little while to figure out our sonic stamp. And once people become comfortable with that, they rely on it. So at this stage in the game, you know, I'll work with T-Bone, and he might not even, he'll just know that we're going to get it right. So he'll move on to something else, knowing that we're submitting to the labels and the clients. And he doesn't have to call up and say, hey, can you tweak this, can you tweak that? He just knows that we do it. So if you listen to some of those recent albums that we've done with him, that's a culmination of 20 years of getting in each other's heads. You know, it's a service business. We're there to serve. We have to, when the client comes in, you know, we have our experience, which tells us what we need to do to the audio to make it fit into the market. That's the bottom line. You got to sell this thing. You have to also be an artist that feels like you're expressing yourself in the right way, sonically speaking, as one of the elements of everything. So we're there to serve that. And we have to try to read from you what it is you're looking for, in addition to bringing our experience into something that the artist might have lost sight of, because that's why they're there with us. If they could do it, they would do it. So they're there to rely on us and our experience. So it's a whole combination of things like that. And if somebody comes in the first time, we'll get it right. It'll be a good sounding album. But if they come in repeatedly like that, like a relationship with T-Bone and Mike Piersante, who's his engineer, Jason Wormer as well, one of his other engineers, those relationships go so deep, and we get, you know, every time we work together, we find little detailed sonic elements. And that's not to say we make it sound like us. The point is to make it sound like we were never there. And there's flavor to it, but it's not something you're conscious of. You're conscious of that music. The listener has to connect with the music. If they start connecting with something that we're doing, then we haven't done a good job, you know.
Absolutely. Okay, so for the next question, it's from one of our alumni, Louis Nielsen. He's asked, is there any advice you would give mixing engineers when preparing mixes to be mastered?
There's a few things. Less is more is always better, you know. Are you guys all mixers or engineers, or what's the flavor of this from
They do
artists?
a combination of everything, as far as learning how to record, to engineer, and to mix.
Yeah.
And many students are enrolled in mastering modules currently, so they're on their journey.
Well, I suppose if you're a mixing engineer and you know, everybody does everything and then gives you the mix, that's one thing. But many projects these days, because of the budgets the way they are, you'll start with somebody and you'll go down the line. So approaching the project from the beginning with that kind of attitude, less is more, is generally the success story. Because you know, when you think about what you're doing, you know, arts arts is an expression of a culture. You judge a culture by its artistic output. That's how the word gets out. And if you're a person of the world, you absorb what's going on in the world through the arts is the way in, you know. Visual arts, writing, painting, music, television, movies, whatever. So your job is to capture somebody's artistic expression at any stage down the line, my stage, recording anything. And you have to serve that artistic expression and how that also finds its way into the economic infrastructure. You want to sell CDs. So I think if you consider that as your role and you really step back and you forget about all this technical stuff and the details and how crazy you can go with what type of compressor and all that, and you go, okay, what am I dealing with here? What's this expression that's happening? And you find the least possible journey from point A to point B, the least amount of equipment you can go through, the least amount of resistors and capacitors, and you focus on what it is you're doing. It'll always come out to the less is more philosophy. It's interesting I say that because if you were to study the chain that I use, my console, I might use 3 compressors on a stereo track. But what I'm using is a very little bit of each. I'm trying to accomplish something on the sound, so I'll take the best piece of gear and I'll use a touch of it. If I slam it and I use a bunch of processing on something, you can generally hear it. Now I've done a bad job. You can hear that I was there. So to the untrained eye, you could say, oh, you got all this stuff. You don't need that. You said you don't need it. Why are you using it? It's because I use a touch of each. You know, so if you figure out how to use less is more in terms of your chain, and if you have more stuff in your chain, less of it, that's to me what makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think you answered part of the next question from Rushabh Nanda.
Well, we're going to be done in 3 minutes.
He's asked, is your approach to mastering albums different to mastering game audio, perhaps? And I guess from a creative perspective, you've answered that in the sense about understanding the story, whether it be the visual art, as you mentioned, or the auditory arts. From a technical perspective, are there any differences in your approach to game audio compared to perhaps a musical album?
Well, you know, there's this big fight for dynamic range. Music is music. You print a low-level disc, the music's going to touch somebody, it's going to touch them anyway. So it's irrelevant, this level thing. I found that what happened when CDs first went into the car, which is probably at around the time a lot of you were being born, it changed the way compression was looked at in our world, because all of a sudden you took music which was being consumed on vinyl in a home while you had the time to listen to it because the cell phone wasn't ringing. Now all of a sudden you're in a car and you've got all this ambient noise around you. So we had to reduce the dynamic range, compress, you know, so that you could hear the low passages. And that kind of started a trend. It was one of those tipping points that's gone too far, and only now is showing signs of easing back, you know. So when you look at various genres of music, you know, we now live life on the go. So your music consumption is done on earbuds predominantly as you're running around doing 10 other things. So the ambient noise your music's competing with is one thing, and the actual life activities your music's competing with is another. So there has been a trend to everything's just got to be slammed in your face, in your face, in your face. And remarkably, that happened in the games, but remarkably in the game world now, these guys are spending so much money because there's money in that field. And I deal with guys that go to Abbey Road and do the score and hire the best of the best. It costs a fortune to do that. Come in and, you know, maybe do some additional tracks, bring it in. And they're really, really interested in this dynamic range and this sweeping.
It's just a very different philosophy.
Beautiful
really.
Music, yeah. But there's a lot of that EDM stuff there too. There's a lot of that heavy hitting, and that stuff really is very, very linear. You know, you're in one place. And that's the nature of that music. So it's very appropriate to treat it that way, because you have to look at, how did we arrive at that place where everything's so linear? Music's not like that. I mean, music is this alive, pulsing thing. It kind of doesn't make sense that music should be like that. But, because of these lifestyle trends, that's kind of what happened. And now there's a market for it. So if there's a market for it, and that's what it is, that's how that gets treated. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. The next question comes from Matt James, and he has asked, can you list the following in order of importance in a mastering engineer's career? First up, equipment. Second up, client relations. And lastly, training and experience.
Okay. We had a chat before we came in here, and we were talking about equipment and what that means, A lot of these questions, they relate to everything down the line. The processes of processing audio are philosophically the same, conceptually the same, conceptually very simple. In this school that you're in, you're learning a trade. They're teaching you how to do something. But you don't leave with the equipment that's in the school, you leave with your skills. You go out into the world and you try to use those skills to impress people expressing themselves and the people who underwrite that, people who finance it. And, if you have this skill and you know who you are and you really have that sense of what your job is, okay, there's that artist, I'm going to make sure to capture that artist, and I'm going to show this artist that my capture is going to touch a lot of their people, and and you become the person to go to. You may be you will be dealing with different artists every day, every week, however long your projects go. And your skill set is what counts. So you're going to be thrown into somebody who's great but has no money but somehow is coming up. And then from there, you'll go into this big budget scenario, and then you'll be back on this small budget thing. And how you know how to capture that, mix that, whatever you're doing with that, is what's important. I think that's more important than the equipment you have to do it. I've actually worked on albums where somebody did some vocal on an iPhone voice memo, and somehow they stuck that in because when they did it for real, the feeling wasn't there. So somehow they did that and tweaked it and got it in. So you're living in an age of technology that didn't even exist 100 years ago. You'd have to go to a performance to see it. And if you weren't there, you missed it. Now, there's this ability through analog technology to capture that over the years. That could pretty near perfected. I mean, when you think about the magnetic impulses that went to a piece of tape and then could get played back later through a speaker, through magnetic impulses to vibrate air particles, you could get something very close to the original recording. It's never perfect. And then digital technology came in and changed that game a little bit, and now that's getting very good. It's got a ways to go. It'll be another decade and maybe two before that's near perfect. That's probably the time estimate I'd give it. So, conceptually, there's very little stuff there. There's compressors to reduce your dynamic range, equalizers, which incidentally were invented to compensate for poor mic placement. There's no excuse for poor mic placement. Don't use an EQ if you don't need to use an EQ. Put the mic in a different place so that you don't have to use an EQ. If you've got an SM58, it's your mic pre, it's your analog to digital converter that matters as well. But if you're dealing with low budget scenario and you've got an artist that has to express, and you're living in 2017 where you've got this technology to allow that artist to express themselves when only 100 years ago they couldn't do it, pull out your phone if that's the only thing in the room and figure out how to use the room acoustics, how to do something. You can do a job with that. You're capturing an expression so that it gets replicated later. That's the point of what you're doing. That's something that couldn't be done until very recently in humanity, You'll see people that might put a little more importance on a big stars album than a indie album, to me, when I look at that, I'm looking at a person who doesn't know who they are. If you know who you are, what's going on in here? Why am I doing this? You're just going to be consistent. You're going to treat everything the same, whether you're doing it for free or you're doing it for big bucks. So I think looking at that kind of thing, clients will look at that. Clients will want to be treated consistently, fairly, with attention. That really is consistent. I suppose consistency is the word that really impresses in the U.S. And when I see that, I see people succeed. So that really is the key to client relations. But it's not like, okay, I have to work now to make sure to impress this client so I can keep this client. It's more like, I go to work, this is who I am, and whoever is attracted to that will be working with me. And that's how I look at life, and that's why I get these client relationships that I'm very fond of, instead of like, oh, geez, what a grind, I have to go in today, and I've got to keep this client. That's looking at it in reverse to me. So you figure out who you are, and that consistency and that mindset going in. What was the third element of that question?
It was the training and experience. Equipment, client relations, and training and experience.
The training and experience, that who you are thing, that's how you're raised. That's who you are. That's got nothing to do with your training. But depending on who you are, I mean, to me, I'm looking at a room full of people who paid a good sum of money to be here, who really decided this is what you want to do. I mean, that's impressive stuff, You got to see that in yourself and have that pride. I mean, I'm sure you all do, The training is the skill set. It's not got to do with what gear you have. It's when you leave here, do you have something that you didn't have before you showed up, in regards to how you can use equipment to do that capture, and in regards to how you deal with people, how you interact in the world. Are you going to get back to people? Are you going to respond to your emails? Are you going to be consistent? Are you going to treat that indie artist the same way you're treating, Sting? You know what I'm saying? So I hope that covers that.
I think it does. You were mentioning the technology, excuse me, and the changes over time and the availability of technology. So this question relates to your amazing plugin. How long did it take to develop the Mastering Console plugin with IK Multimedia, and what were some of the main challenges in its development?
That took a year to develop with an Italian company, IK. They came out to LA to work with us on measuring everything. But what was important to us in this process, I'll explain it like this. I hope this will make sense, and stop me if it doesn't. And this actually ties into the previous question, training. So this is how I was trained. This character, Doug Sachs, you should look him up. He was one of the original guys in this business. So back then, everything was about analog tape. Every day, reels and reels of analog tape would show up. And what we would do to evaluate these tapes is we'd have different playback heads, different tape machine playbacks, tube or solid state, and different electronics and capacitors within the head stacks and everything else. So we had multiple options on just how to play a tape, and they would sound very different. So it would take hours for us to figure out just how to get the tape played back. Now you come here with a file, we put it up, okay, cool, needs some of this and some of that, forgetting why an equalizer was invented in the first place. Now it's just like this, weapon, So my job was to figure out how to get the tape played back, which is a tremendous responsibility, because when Doug came in, he wanted this tape to sound righteous, So there's training that went into that. He didn't just go figure it out, kid. That was some time to get that. So, we'd have 2 or 3 playback heads to figure out which machine. Oh, solid state, a little more punchy. Tube, a little more saturated. Now, okay, we'll pick the tube machine for this. All right, this line of capacitors and this circuit board is a little more this way sounding a little more punchy in the saturated sense. This one is a little more swampy. So once we figured out how to play the tape back, very, very little processing was needed. And this was while they were still cutting vinyl. So dynamic range and the squash of dynamic range, all that compression stuff, was not yet much of an issue. It was starting to become an issue. But, you know, nowadays when you got people who say, how loud can you get it, make it this, make it that, there wasn't so much of that back then. So to me, when I looked at what I do for a living, I look at how to play something back as being an important part of the process of what's going to ultimately happen to it. And what I find with all my colleagues when I go around the US and interact with my community, as I suggest all you guys do, never be threatened by competition, by the way. That's an important point. Your community is the only reason there's an industry. If you're the only one doing it and you don't want your competitors working, you will be out of business. Conceptually speaking, it's a dangerous mindset. So we all get along in our community. There's not that many of us, actually. I wish there were more. Maybe you guys can get in there, you know? Anyway, I digress. My point was this. The nature of playing back that audio was actually, when you think about it, an EQ process. It was a sonic process. So by the time you do that little touch of EQ, maybe, little 1 dB of something here and there, it's a part of the picture of how you decided to line up the tape. So when you look at how we work, and you guys will, you know, maybe you're already doing this. There's that consistency I mentioned. There's a consistency to how we approach a genre of music. And you always have a sense of the project before it comes in, you know. You're in the pulse, you're in the business, you know. You don't, something doesn't come in one day and you're like, oh, this, you know. You always know beforehand. So, you know, Stephen Barton's coming in with the new Titanfall soundtrack on from Abbey Road, you know, I'll have a picture of this already. And what I do is days before and the day before, as I'm driving home or something like that, I'll you know, just kind of put in my mind how I'm going to approach the thing the next day, so that by the time I go in, it might look like I'm showing up and just jumping in, but you know, there's an hour or two of thinking here and there on how we're going to start. So when I mentioned before about having 3 compressors in the chain of a stereo track, that's what that is. I'll think, okay, well, you know, this guy's coming in. I know what he wants. First of all, that's important. But I know how he works, and I know the sound of that Abbey Road orchestral hall. You learn the sound of different halls around the world, you know, consoles, studios around LA, and, you know, this place is a Neve, and that's going to sound like this. You kind of have a sense of what something's going to sound like when you get plugged into that industry. So you have a starting point. Like, okay, I'm gonna patch this stuff in, and then when he shows up, we're gonna put the file in, and we're gonna start listening. And maybe I'll take this piece of gear out, and maybe I'll reinsert this one. But you have a starting point, and that's the point. So this plugin, if you check it out, you'll see that there's a console with presets. So if you've got an EDM track, you've got a starting point, and that's a vague equivalent of that lining up the tape machine concept.
Wow, that's amazing.
If that makes sense. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
So so we did the work for you. You just have to put a touch of this and a touch of that. You don't have to do much. You can even just use the presets and it's going to work. I'm very proud of it. It's a cool plugin. Very, very psyched. It's the only thing on the market like it, and IK is working pretty hard to promote it.
When mastering for digital releases, do you advise any additional stereo field shaping during mastering?
No, that stuff's for the mix. You know, my colleagues, some colleagues differ with me on this, but it's my philosophy that one sound should cover all formats, which is sort of an unfair mindset because, you know, vinyl has a curve, and you know, you add in earbuds, and that's a different thing. Maybe you should do it for different environments, but you're dealing with a lot. You're dealing with budgets. You know, people aren't going to come in and have you do 3 versions of something, and if you know, if they want you to, you know, we're going to pay the rent, you know, time is money. So we have to figure out a way to serve, but to also stay in business. So you have to really balance this stuff out, and that's a big important part of being in business. You know, time is money. It comes down to that. So luckily, for some reason, for the alignment of the planets, we have found that one sound covers all of the formats, which is not exactly what that question was, but I figured I would throw that in. And that question is more about, do you want to do a spread for this or that? But, you know, I think the mix is where those decisions are made, and there's a gray area between the processes, but in the older days there was much more defined areas. Now we're doing some mixing. It happens. But I think if those decisions need to be made, they need to be made for the music. You know, you like I said, you're capturing an artist's vision. An artist is going to express culture of the moment to the masses and hopefully make a few bucks if they can. And if that means they want to do a stereo spread, then that's what they should do. Forget about the formats and anything else. And the digital formats, all that iTunes stuff, that's more about the bit rate, you know. That's a 24-bit file instead of a 16-bit file.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, our next question comes from our own mastering guru, our lecturer here, Tim Lengfeld, and he's written in to me and asked, I am curious about how you handle limiting, considering your all-analog chain. Do you monitor through a limiter while mastering, or do you do it after it has been captured?
No, that's all part of the process. If the limiting is needed as a part of the shape of the sound we're going for, then that's what that is. The importance of what he's stating is the quality of the A to Ds and the D to A converters. But anything like that, which is a sonic shaping process, is done as a mindset of part of what we do to shape the sound.
Okay. Do you perhaps foresee 32-bit becoming the recognized standard going forward? Is that something that has been talked about in the communities in LA?
My observations are that you've got data companies and you've got us who are really into the notion of how good can we make it. How good can we make it means we make a larger file. You compress it down, you get a smaller file. It's not as how good as we can make it. But our fight is how good we can make it. The data companies who are in the business of making money are all about how much stuff can we squeeze in. So anytime there's a wider bandwidth and we think, oh great, now we can get a high-res file to our audience, their mindset is, oh cool, now we can send more stuff to the audience. So the drive is it's driven by what the consumers want. So if it's driven by what the consumers want, the job then becomes to educate the consumers. If you stand back and do nothing, they will want 10 songs instead of 2 songs because they don't know. So our job as a community, and I get involved in this pretty heavily because I see it this way. Okay, I do my job, I do my thing, people come in, I've been fortunate enough to pay my rent, hopefully I'll be able to keep doing that. Is to get involved in the community and the groups that do help educate the consumers. And once the information is out, the consumers can make their own decisions. I do a lot of work through the Recording Academy, the organization that gives out the Grammys. They have a huge community group and a loud voice in the industry. And we all gather and we go to Washington, D.C., we go to Capitol Hill once a year. And even lobby with Congress. I've led meetings with congressmen and congresswomen, and promoting various initiatives on artist rights, royalty distributions, which is related to what we're talking about. And through the Recording Academy as well, there's a big push for high-res audio, and there's always the pushback. Why should I care? From the audience, and you give the information, And if you are good and persuasive as a group and with your elected leaders in these community organizations, the message will get out and persuade people to take 2 songs instead of 10. And if you're not good, or if you are good and they don't care, they'll take 10 songs. So you know what I mean? You have to, again, you have to know who you are in this thing. Okay, I care about good audio. I'm going to spread the word. I'm not going to take it personally or get bent out of shape if we don't succeed. But this is what we're up against. You know, you see people getting frustrated and flying off the handle and going, oh my God, how can they think of this and do that? But at the end of the day, you just have to have a clear head about it and keep the standards up. So what it looks like to me is there's a lot, to get to the question, there's a lot of money and organized effort in the companies that actually are making money, piping data around. So you can sit and make music, but the people that get it from point A to point B are the people that are going to make the bucks. We're gonna make the small bucks, but hang in there. It's going to come back around. It's a tough time. It's a transition time in the music business right now. But you guys are dedicated. I'm dedicated. It's part of who we are. That is who we are inside. That's our fight. That's our identity. You know, where the money is usually is who drives the train. It's a hard fight. If we do nothing, then it'll be MP3s as our standard. MP3s should be illegal, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
They're good to pipe around. You know, you send somebody a track and they can bust out a vocal and send it back. You know, whatever. They serve a purpose, but not as a consumable, you know, device for a song. So will these standards be released? I imagine on a consumer for sale base. I don't know. Not in the foreseeable future. Maybe some. You know, there's some high-res markets out there.
I guess we've seen that even with the like of Trent Reznor's last album, where there was an audiophile version, a high-res version for those who genuinely appreciate the high-res files. Perhaps one day we'll get there.
I will say this though: the labels, all the major record labels, they have a mandate now, and we have to follow it. And if the stuff comes in at 96.24, we have to ship it out at 96.24. We also have to make the 44.16s and the 44.24s for iTunes. But whatever comes in at has to be shipped as that as well. And that's a very new thing.
I think at this point what we'll do is we'll open up to the floor. Are there any questions?
Hi, I'm an old student here, but I thought I'd come around and listen to what you have to say. I just wanted to ask, do you find yourself mastering specific genres, or do you find yourself listening to many genres to know what they should feel like under a master? I don't know if that makes sense. So do you find yourself studying other genres and the feel and the sound of them, so that when something off the cuff comes in that you may be unfamiliar with, do you find yourself experimenting in ways of how it should sound, or do you listen to other bands in the same?
That question has multiple layers to it. You know, being in LA, which is a world center for music, I've been lucky enough a couple of times in my life to even help set what standards are. And what I mean by that is this: in the very beginning of my career, I did a lot of that. You know, you get in there, you just immerse yourself, so you know what's going on, because you're mixing art with commerce. You're serving an artist's vision, and you're doing this for the fans. So when an artist comes to deal with you, and the artist becomes your client, you both are working for the fans. They have to have an immense experience. Everything that you're doing is for them at every moment that you do it. To have the greatest experience they could have, the best you can do, whatever that may be, you know, whatever you got to work with, extract the most goodness out of it and give it to them. So when you talk about how we immerse ourselves in that, it's actually remarkable. I never am aware of it at the time. Like you said, do you ever know you're working on a hit? It's even bigger than that. I'll work on an album that will have such an impact that everybody will try to copy that, and it becomes kind of a norm, you know. And I'll look back a year or two later, and I'll go, "Wow, we did that," you know. And then everybody else is looking at that, and we did that. And it's not because we're something special, it's because we were there. Somehow that happened, you know? Being in LA, these are the things that happen, and these are the environments you're exposed to. So, you know, so it goes deep like that for me, the way I look at it. I suppose what I consider successful is that somehow I've managed to pay my own rent and buy my own groceries, you know? And, you know, in this business, as your body ages, maybe that doesn't go on forever. So I'm lucky enough that I'm still managing to do that 26 years later. And I really just buy into that concept of consistency. So I'm going to work the way that I work. If it moves you to come in and hire me, you know, you're only as good as what you did that morning, yesterday, you know, and your career can be gone in 2 seconds, you know. It's very, very competitive in the United States. I mean, it's just off the charts competitive. So, so the way that I've decided a long time ago to approach it is I take a stand as to what I believe. I'll say that, and if that alienates some people, so be it, you know. And I took that attitude when I had nothing at stake. Now I have a lot at stake, you know. If this thing falls apart, what am I going to do, you know? But that was the consistent approach, and I've managed to keep a good clientele coming in, people that want what's in my brain. What do you think? This is what I think. They pay us for that, you know. And I have a crew of people that believe in that too. We all support each other. But it all comes down to who am I underneath all of the stuff that's fleeting, the stuff that can go away. You know, your studio burns down, your stuff's gone. Well, who are you? What are you going to do? Well, I'm in the community. I've got friends. I'll call a buddy of mine who does what I do, who I'm a competitor with, and I'll say I'm in a pinch. I got to take care of somebody, and that has happened. And I've done that for people, and they've done that for me. So you trust within your community. Oh, I'm not going to go in and try to snake his clients, you know. You guys can judge the success. To me, I just feel lucky that every month that rent gets paid and bills get paid, and I'm like, okay, another month. We'll see how long we can take it. And I feel lucky enough, like I told you, that you're around to set standards, to be in the mix. People accept you as a tastemaker, I suppose, in your field, you know. It's just about how much you mean it. And positioning. You know, it's not like you don't just go home and mean it, because who's going to see you mean it, you know? You got to get in the mix. You got to involve yourself in the community. Sorry to interrupt you there, but this is important. The other thing is stay busy. Always stay busy. Don't worry about how much money you're making. You know, I know people who won't work unless they're getting paid. Do some work without getting paid. The important thing is to be busy every day, because when somebody comes along and wants to hire you and sees that you've been busy every day, you're more likely to get a gig than somebody who kind of sat one out because you didn't like the pay. The pay will come. You know, don't worry about your rate. Get in there, get in the community. In the beginning stages, later on it becomes more complicated as you get kids in the house and, you know, all that stuff you got to pay for. And stay busy, get in there. If you cannot get yourself a paid gig, offer yourself up and get credentials. You're putting every project you do as a credential. It's, oh, I did that. Oh, you did that? Great. Maybe you should do my bad. Yeah, if you're not learning something new every day, then try it and do something else. You know, you got to do that. That's part of it.
I think some of the common themes that we've been hearing today have been passion, commitment, consistency, and I know that I take motivation from that, and I'm hoping you all do too. At this point, we have unfortunately run out of time. I would like you all to give a hearty thank you to Gavin. We look forward to hearing your productions in the future. I'm sure there'll be many that will stay in our CDs and perhaps on our computers and our hard drives. Yeah. And we look forward to it. Please, everybody, thank you, Gavin, very much.
Thank you guys, too. Thank you.